The forest was quiet when Lyra heard the crash, and she had been gathering moonberries near the crystal stream, when the sound of breaking branches and a human scream shattered the peace, and her two dragons, Ember and Frost, lifted their heads from where they rested in the clearing, and their eyes glowing with alert concern. Lyra ran toward the noise, and her silver hair streaming behind her, and her healer instincts overriding caution. And through the thick trees she found him, in a human male, collapsed against a fallen log, and his clothes torn, and blood seeping from deep claw marks across his chest and shoulder, and the metallic smell told her he had been bleeding for hours. Ember reached him first, and the crimson dragon lowering her massive head to sniff the stranger, and she rumbled deep in her throat, and not a warning but curiosity. And Frost landed beside Lyra, and his silver scales shimmering, and his eyes fixed on the wounded human with suspicion. "He is dying," and Lyra whispered, and knelt beside the man, and his skin was pale, and sweat covered his face, and his breathing came in shallow gasps, and she had never seen a human before, and only heard stories from the old ones who remembered when humans visited the eternal forests, centuries ago. The man opened his eyes, and they were brown and warm despite the pain clouding them, and he tried to speak, but only a rasp came out, and Lyra pressed her hand to his chest, and feeling the weak flutter of his heart, and she made her decision quickly. "I am taking him to camp," and she told her dragons, and Ember helped me carry him. And the red dragon lowered herself, and allowing Lyra to drape the human across her back, and together they flew through the forest canopy, and moving swiftly toward Lyra's hidden camp. She worked through the night, and her hands glowing with healing magic as she closed the worst wounds, and the claw marks were from a shadow beast, and a creature that should not have been this deep in the protected forest. And the human had been lucky to survive the initial attack, and luckier still that Lyra found him. By dawn the man was stable, and his breathing steady, and the color returning to his face, and Lyra sat back exhausted, and her magic depleted, and Ember curled around the camp protectively while Frost watched the human with wary eyes. He slept for 2 days, and during that time Lyra studied him, and his clothes were strange, and made of materials she did not recognize, and not leather or cloth, but something smooth and dark. And in his pocket she found a small device that glowed with symbols she could not read, and she left it beside him, and respecting his belongings. When he finally woke on the 3rd morning, Lyra was preparing herbs for poultices, and Ember dozed by the fire, and her tail twitching in dreams, and the man sat up slowly and wincing, and looked around with confusion. And then his eyes found Lyra and widened. "Where am I?" and he asked, and his voice rough, and Lyra turned to face him, and speaking slowly in the common tongue, "And you are in the Silverwood Forest, and I am Lyra, and I found you dying 3 days ago." The man touched his chest, and feeling the new scars through his torn shirt, "And you healed me." And it was not a question, but a statement of wonder, and how and I should be dead. Lyra moved closer, and Ember lifted her head to watch. "And I am a healer, and my magic closed your wounds, and you are lucky. The shadow beast did not tear deeper. And what is a human doing in the eternal forest, and your kind has not walked here in generations?" The man smiled weakly. "And my name is Cole Harris, and I am from Earth, and our ship crashed beyond the mountains, and I have been searching for help for days." And he paused, and looking at Ember with awe, "And are those dragons and real dragons?" Lyra felt pride warm her chest, and yes, and Ember and Frost are my bonded companions, and they helped save you, and dragons are guardians of my people. And though fewer bond with each generation, and she did not know why she shared this sadness with a stranger. Cole stared at Ember with the look of a child seeing magic for the first time. And on Earth, dragons are myths and stories we tell children, and to see one real and breathing and alive. And his voice broke with emotion. Ember rumbled in a sound almost like a purr, and she stretched her long neck toward Cole and sniffing him carefully. And then to Lyra's surprise, the dragon lowered her head in acceptance, and Cole reached out with a trembling hand and touched the crimson scales. "He is brave," and Ember's voice echoed in Lyra's mind, and the dragon bond allowing communication, and he smells of stars and metal and sadness, and but his heart is strong. Frost hissed from his perch, and less trusting than his sister and Lyra understood, and humans were unpredictable, and their history with the elven people was complicated, and but this human had done nothing wrong, and he was injured and alone. and far from home. You said your ship crashed, and Lyra asked, and sitting across from Cole, and how many survived, and Cole's face darkened, and just me and the others. And they died on impact, and I have been alone for a week and trying to find civilization and trying to find help. Lyra felt sympathy pierce her heart. And I am sorry for your loss, and you are safe here while you heal, and the forest can be dangerous, and especially for those who do not know its ways. Cole nodded, and then looked at his chest again and lifting his shirt, to see the scars, and they were pink and new but clean. And on my world this would have taken months to heal. And if it healed at all, and your magic is incredible. It is the gift of my people, and Lyra said quietly. And though it grows weaker, and we, elves, live long, but our numbers dwindle, and fewer children are born each century, and the magic fades, and she did not know why she was telling him this, and perhaps because he was an outsider, and someone who would not judge or pity. Cole met her
eyes and his expression serious, and on earth we have a saying, and nothing lasts forever, and but that makes the time we have more precious. And maybe your magic is not dying, and maybe it is just changing. Lyra considered his words, and humans lived
such short lives in burning bright and quick like shooting stars, and while elves endured for thousands of years and watching ages pass, and perhaps there was wisdom in the human perspective, and in treasuring the present, rather than mourning an endless future. Over the next 2 days, Cole grew stronger, and Lyra brought him food and taught him which plants were safe and which streams held clean water, and Cole told her about Earth and about metal cities that touched the sky and ships that sailed between stars and weapons that could shatter mountains. Ember grew fond of the human, and allowing him to rest against her warm scales, and even taking him flying once when his wounds had healed enough, and Frost remained cautious, but no longer hostile, and watching Cole with calculating silver eyes. On the 4th night, Cole could not sleep, and Lyra found him sitting by the fire and staring into the flames, and she sat beside him, and the night air cool and filled with the sound of crickets and distant owl calls. Thank you. And Cole said quietly, and for saving me, and for not leaving me to die. And I know your people have no reason to trust humans. Lyra looked at him, and we are all people, and Cole, and worth saving, and worth knowing, and besides, an Ember likes you, and dragons are excellent judges of character. Cole laughed and then winced, and still sore, and I never thought I would hear someone say a dragon likes me, and on Earth that would be insane. Here it is simply truth. And Lyra said, and you should rest, and tomorrow I will check your wounds again and make sure infection has not set in. Cole nodded but did not move, and instead he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And Lyra, and why did you really save me? And you could have left me and let the forest take me. Because every life matters, and she answered, and even human lives, and even strange lives that fall from the sky. Cole smiled, and that smile that would become familiar in the days ahead, and I think I am very lucky you believe that. The fever came on the 5th night without warning, and Cole had seemed fine during the day, and even helping Lyra gather firewood and laughing when Ember playfully knocked him over with her tail, and but by sunset he was shaking and his skin burning hot and the wounds on his chest angry. And Red Lyra cursed herself for not being more careful, and shadow beast claws carried poison and slow acting, but deadly, and she had cleaned the wounds, but perhaps not deep enough, and now the infection raged through Cole's body and turning his blood to fire. She worked frantically, and her hands glowing with healing magic as she drew the poison out, but it was strong, and it fought her, and Cole thrashed, on his bedroll and caught in fever dreams and speaking in broken sentences about his crew and his ship, and someone named Katie who had died in the crash. Hold him still, and Lyra commanded, and Frost moved forward, and using his bulk to pin Cole's legs while Ember crooned softly and trying to soothe the human, but Cole's eyes were wild and unseeing and lost in nightmare visions. Lyra leaned over him and pressing both hands to his chest and pulling the poison with everything she had, and the magic flowing from her core and burning through her reserves, and she could feel herself weakening. But she did not stop, and could not stop. And this human had become important, and more important than she wanted to admit. Cole's hand shot out, and grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise and his fingers like iron, and Lyra gasped in pain and tried to pull free. But his grip was locked, and in desperation, and acting on pure instinct, and she bit down on his shoulder, and her teeth breaking, Skin Cole released her immediately and crying out, and Lyra fell backward and breathing hard and tasting blood on her lips, and Ember rumbled in alarm. And are you hurt? And the dragon asked in her mind. The fever came on the 5th night without warning, and Cole had seemed fine during the day and even helping Lyra gather firewood and laughing when Ember playfully knocked him over with her tail, but by sunset, he was shaking and his skin burning, hot and the wounds on his chest angry, and Red Lyra cursed herself for not being more careful, and Shadow Beast claws carried poison and slow-acting but deadly, and she had cleaned the wounds, but perhaps not deep enough, and now the infection raged through Cole's body and turning his blood to fire. She worked frantically and her hands glowing with healing magic as she drew the poison out but it was strong and it fought her, and Cole thrashed on his bedroll and caught in fever dreams and speaking in broken sentences about his crew and his ship and someone named Katie, who had died in the crash hold him still, and Lyra commanded, and Frost moved forward and using his bulk to pin Cole's legs, while Ember crooned softly and trying to soothe the human, but Cole's eyes were wild and unseeing and lost in nightmare visions. Lyra leaned over him and pressing both hands to his chest and pulling the poison with everything she had, and the magic flowing from her core and burning through her reserves, and she could feel herself weakening. But she did not stop and could not stop, and this human had become important, and more important than she wanted to admit. Cole's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise, and his fingers like iron, and Lyra gasped in pain and tried to pull free, but his grip was locked and in desperation and acting on pure instinct, and she bit down on his shoulder and her teeth breaking. Skin Cole released her immediately, and, crying out, and Lyra fell backward and breathing hard and tasting blood on her lips, and Ember rumbled in alarm. And are you hurt? And the dragon asked in her mind. I am fine, and Lyra answered and breathing heavily, but we must work faster, and he is dying. For 3 hours she poured magic into Cole and extracting poison and sealing damaged tissue and forcing his body to fight. And by the time the fever broke, Lyra was trembling with exhaustion and barely able to sit upright, and the clearing spun around her. Cole slept peacefully finally, and his breathing even, and the wounds clean and pink, and Lyra collapsed beside the fire, and Frost curling around her protectively, and you depleted yourself foolishly, and the silver dragon said, and his voice stern but concerned, perhaps, and Lyra whispered, but he lives, and that is what matters. Ember nuzzled her gently, and you care for this human, and more than duty requires, and why Lyra had no answer, or perhaps she did, but was not ready to speak it aloud, and she drifted into exhausted sleep, and her last thought of Cole's hand gripping her wrist and the desperate strength of someone fighting to survive. When she woke the next morning, Cole was sitting up and looking much better, and the color returned to his face, and he smiled when he saw her, and that warm smile that made something flutter in her chest. You saved me again. And he said quietly, and I remember the fever and the pain, and your magic pulling me back, and thank you. Lyra sat up slowly, and her body still weak, and you grabbed me and hurt me, and I had to bite you to make you release, and I am sorry. Cole touched his shoulder and feeling the bite mark through his shirt and his expression thoughtful, and then, to Lyra's surprise, he laughed, and you bit me in like a wild animal, and I love it. Lyra felt heat rise in her cheeks, and it was not funny, and you could have broken my wrist, I know. And Cole said, and his smile fading, and I am sorry. And the fever, and I was not myself, but thank you for not giving up on me. They sat in comfortable silence, and Ember bringing Cole food and fresh water, and Frost watching from a distance, and over the next days, Cole healed completely, and the fever leaving, him stronger somehow and more alive. One morning, Lyra noticed Cole sitting alone and using a sharp tool on his shoulder, and she approached curious. And what are you doing? Cole looked up and his eyes bright, and I'm giving myself a tattoo. And he turned, slightly, and showing her the mark he was creating, and it was dark ink pressed into skin in a deliberate pattern, and the exact shape of her bite. Lyra stared in shock, and why? And why would you mark yourself with that? Cole continued working, and his hands steady and on earth, we tattoo ourselves to remember important things and important moments and important people. And he paused, and you saved my life twice, and Lyra. And that bite reminded me I was alive, and alive enough to feel pain, and alive enough to fight, and I want to remember that always. But it will be permanent. And Lyra said, and confused, and you will carry that mark until you die. Cole met her eyes, and exactly, and some things should be permanent, and some moments should not be forgotten, and you are one of those moments. Lyra felt something shift in her chest, and something warm and frightening, and she had lived 300 years and had seen countless humans come and go, and their brief lives flickering past like candle flames, but none had ever marked themselves with her touch, and none had ever looked at her the way Cole did. The tattoo took hours to complete, and Cole working with practiced precision. And when he finished, the bite mark was perfect and preserved in ink, and a permanent reminder of violence and healing and desperate connection. Lyra reached out slowly and tracing the air above the mark without touching, and it is well done. And she admitted, and the artist captured every detail. I did it myself. And Cole said, and I have others and scars and marks and memories written on skin. And now I have you. That night Lyra could not sleep, and she sat by the fire watching Cole rest, and Ember's words echoing in her mind. And you care for this human more than duty requires, and why? Because he is different. And Lyra thought, and because he marks his skin to remember, and because he looks at dragons with wonder, and because he asked about her people, and really listened when she spoke of their fading, and because his life would be brief and bright and burning, and because he made her feel something she had not felt in decades. Cole stirred and opened his eyes, and finding her watching and cannot sleep, and he asked, too many thoughts? And Lyra answered, and Cole sat up and moving to sit beside her, want to share, and he asked gently. Lyra hesitated and then spoke quietly, and my people are dying. And Cole, and slowly and inevitably, and in 1,000 years we may be only memory, and fewer children are born each generation, and the dragons bond with fewer elves, and the magic weakens, and we have accepted this fate, and accepted that all things. And Cole was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke, and his voice firm, and on earth we have a saying, and never give up and never surrender, and maybe your people are fading, but that does not mean you cannot fight, and 1,000 years is a long time, and Lyra, and enough time to find answers and to change fate. You speak of fighting death itself. And Lyra said, and that is impossible. Is it? And Cole asked, and my people went to the stars, and Cole and we built ships that travel faster than light, and we cured diseases that killed millions, and we did impossible things because we refused to accept that some problems have no solutions, and maybe your people need to remember how to fight. Lyra looked at him, and this human with his tattoos and his fierce determination and his absolute refusal to accept defeat. And maybe he was right, and maybe the elves had lived so long they had forgotten urgency and forgotten that every moment mattered. Teach me about humans, and she said suddenly, and teach me how you fight and how you refuse to give up. Cole grinned, and that smile that made her heart race, and I can do that, but first you need to teach me about dragon magic and about elf healing and fair trade. Lyra smiled despite herself, and fair trade, and she agreed, and they shook hands in sealing the bargain, and both knowing something had changed between them, and something important and permanent and like ink pressed into skin. The lessons began the next morning, and Cole insisted on teaching first, and he showed Lyra basic self-defense moves and techniques humans used when fighting without weapons, and at first she was clumsy and unused to physical combat, and elves relied on magic and distance, but Cole was patient and encouraging. You are thinking too much, and he said as they practiced, and your body knows what to do, and trust your instincts. And when Lyra finally managed to flip him onto his back using his own momentum, Cole laughed with pure joy, and perfect, and exactly like that. Ember watched from nearby, and her great red head resting on her claws, and amused by the human teaching an elf to fight like humans did, and Frost had even warmed to Cole enough to allow him close and occasionally rumbling approval. When Cole said something wise, in return Lyra taught Cole about magic and how it flowed through all living things, and how healers learned to sense and direct that flow. And Cole was fascinated and asking endless questions and taking notes in a small book he had salvaged from his shipwreckage. Can anyone learn magic? And he asked one afternoon. As they sat by the crystal stream, Lyra considered, and humans had magic once and long ago. But you chose different paths, and technology and science and progress, and you traded wonder for understanding, and perhaps both have value, and perhaps both are needed. Cole looked thoughtful. And on Earth we tell stories about magic and dragons and elves and ancient times, and maybe those stories are memories and echoes of what we lost. They fell into a comfortable routine, and mornings for physical training and afternoons for magic lessons and evenings for stories. And Cole told Lyra about Earth and about oceans that covered half the planet and cities with millions of people, and music that could make you cry. And Lyra told Cole about the eternal forests and about elf ceremonies under 3 moons, and about the first dragons who had bonded with her ancestors. One evening, Cole pulled out his small glowing device, and it still had some power remaining, and he showed Lyra pictures and images captured by technology. And there was his crew and 5 people smiling and alive and now all dead. And there was Earth from space and blue and green and beautiful, and there was someone named Katie and a woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She was your mate. And Lyra said gently, and recognizing the look on Cole's face, we were going to be married. And Cole said quietly, and she died in the crash, and instantly. And she did not suffer. And he was silent for a moment, and I miss her. And I will always miss her, but I think she would want me to keep living and to find new reasons to smile. Lyra touched his hand gently, and she would be proud of you, and surviving and fighting, and honoring her memory by living fully. Cole squeezed her hand, and thank you, and for understanding and for not pitying me. Over the following weeks, Cole grew stronger and helping around camp and gathering food and maintaining the fire and even flying, with Ember when the dragon offered. And Lyra watched him laugh with pure delight as they soared above the forest canopy, and his arms spread wide and embracing the impossible. Frost finally accepted Cole completely when the human saved the silver dragon from a trap, and hunters from the outer villages sometimes set snares, and Frost had been caught and panicking, and Cole had approached slowly and speaking softly and calming the dragon while Lyra cut the ropes. And after that, Frost allowed Cole to touch him and even speaking to him through the dragon bond. The human has a good heart, and Frost admitted to Lyra one night, and I was wrong to distrust him. Lyra smiled, and yes, and he does. You care for him, and Frost said, and more than friendship requires. Lyra did not deny it, and yes, and I do, but he is human and his life will pass in a blink, and while I endure. And how can I let myself feel this way? Because some things are worth the pain. And Frost said gently, and because brief and bright is still real and still valuable. One afternoon, Cole showed Lyra more of his tattoos, and each one telling a story, and there was a compass for his grandmother who taught him to navigate, and there was a ship for his first space voyage, and there were names of fallen friends and coordinates of places that mattered, and now there was Lyra's bite and a new chapter in his story. Do you regret any of them? And Lyra asked, and tracing the designs with her eyes, never. And Cole said, and they are all part of me, and the good and the bad and the painful and the joyful, and I wear my history on my skin. And his expression grew thoughtful. And do elves have anything similar? And ways to mark important moments? We have memory crystals. And Lyra said, and we store memories in them, and perfect and preserved, and we can relive them whenever we wish. Cole considered this, and that sounds amazing, but also sad and like living in the past instead of the present. Perhaps you are right, and Lyra admitted, and we elves have so much time that we forget to value the present, and we preserve everything, but experience nothing new. That night a storm rolled through the forest, and rain pounding the canopy and wind howling, and Ember and Frost created a shelter, with their bodies and their scales deflecting the worst of the weather, and Lyra and Cole huddled together for warmth, and the fire impossible to maintain. Cole told stories to pass the time, and tales of Earth and of his childhood, and of learning to fly ships, and of the day he met Katie, and Lyra listened, and storing each word and each memory, and learning who this human was beneath the surface, when the storm passed and dawn breaking clear and beautiful. And Lyra realized she was still leaning against Cole and his arm around her shoulders, and neither of them moved uncomfortable in the closeness. I should return to my patrol soon, and Lyra said quietly, and I have been gone too long, and my people will worry. Cole nodded, and his expression, carefully neutral, and I understand, and I should try to find a way home, or at least to a settlement, and see if anyone can contact Earth. Neither of them moved, and Cole said slowly, and you could show me more of the forest and teach me more about your people, and I could teach you more about humans, and we could keep learning. Lyra smiled, and I would like that. They spent the next weeks exploring, and Lyra showing Cole hidden groves and ancient trees and secret streams and places even most elves did not know. And Cole shared human philosophy and science and music, and he sang songs from Earth, and his voice rough but sincere. And Ember and Frost hummed along. One evening they reached the Star Lake, and a place where the water reflected the sky so perfectly it seemed you could fall upward into infinity. And Lyra had not been here in 50 years, and it remained as beautiful as she remembered. This is incredible. And Cole breathed. And sitting at the shore and staring at the reflection, and on Earth we have places like this and places that make you feel small and infinite at the same time. Lyra sat beside him and Cole, and what will you do? And eventually, and will you try to return to Earth? Cole was quiet for a long time, and I do not know, and part of me wants to go home and to see my family, and to return to my life, but another part of he paused, and another part of me wants to stay and to learn everything about this world and about your people, and about you. Lyra's heart raced, and you would give up your home and your people, and for what? And for a dying race and for forests? You barely know. Cole turned to face her, and his eyes serious, and I would give it up for something worth staying for, and for someone worth staying for, and Lyra. And you saved my life, and you taught me magic still exists, and you made me believe in wonder again. And is that not worth everything? Lyra felt tears sting her eyes. And I am 300 years old. And Cole, and you will live perhaps 80 years if you are lucky, and I will watch you age and fade and die, and how can I bear that? Cole took her hands gently, and then we make those 80 years matter. And we make them count, and we fill them with so much life and so much love that when I am gone you will have no regrets and only gratitude. And the tattoo on his shoulder, and permanent and present, and a reminder that some moments and some people and were worth marking and worth remembering and worth the pain of eventual loss. The decision came naturally and without grand declarations, and Cole stayed, and days turned to weeks and weeks to months, and the forest became his home, and Ember and Frost became his family, and Lyra became his everything. They built a better shelter together, and Cole using human engineering and Lyra adding elf magic, and the result was a dwelling that belonged to both worlds, and wood and stone and growing vines, and yet sturdy and practical and comfortable. And Ember and Frost had their own space in a cave warmed by underground springs. Cole learned to speak to the dragons mind to mind, and the bond forming slowly and differently than with elves, but real and powerful. And Ember taught him to fly properly, and banking and diving and soaring, and Frost taught him patience and strategy, and the art of stillness. Lyra learned human determination and the refusal to accept defeat, and she began researching her people's decline, and reading ancient texts and interviewing elder elves and looking for answers where before there had been only acceptance. One morning, Cole woke to find Lyra gone, and Ember explained she had gone to the capital and to speak with the council and to present findings, and Cole waited anxiously, and hoping the elders would listen and would see value in fighting for their future. Lyra returned 3 days later, and exhausted but excited, and they listened, and Cole, and they actually listened, and we are forming a research group, and healers, and scholars and mages, and we will study the decline and search for solutions, and it has been centuries since my people worked together on something new. Cole lifted her and spun her around, and both laughing and Ember rumbling approval, and this is just the beginning, and Lyra and you have given your people hope. The research took time, and Lyra traveled frequently, and sometimes taking Cole and sometimes leaving him with the dragons, and he spent those times exploring and learning and helping where he could, and the forest accepted him, and recognizing him as friend and protector. They discovered the first clue in an ancient text, and hidden in a library that had not been opened in 200 years, and the magic was not dying, and it was being drained and pulled away to somewhere else and by something else. Cole helped analyze the patterns, and using human scientific methods combined with elf magic sensing, and together they traced the drain to the Shadow Realm, and a place between worlds where dark creatures fed on magical energy, and the shadow beast that had attacked Cole had been a symptom and not a cause. We must close the breach, and Lyra said, and standing before the council again, and if we stop the drain and the magic, we'll return and our people will recover. The council debated for days and afraid of action and comfortable with slow decline, but Lyra was fierce and persuasive, and Cole stood beside her and offering the human perspective and the outsider view that sometimes saw solutions invisible to those too close. Finally, the council agreed, and a mission would be sent, and Lyra would lead, and Cole would come, and Ember and Frost would carry them, and they would find the breach and seal it and save the elven people. Preparations took weeks and gathering supplies and training fighters and researching the Shadow Realm, and Cole taught combat tactics and human strategies, and Lyra organized magical defenses, and together they built a team, and 15 elves and 2 dragons and 1 human, and united in purpose. The night before departure, Lyra could not sleep, and Cole found her sitting under the stars and staring at the 3 moons afraid. And he asked gently, and sitting beside her, terrified, and Lyra admitted, "And what if we fail? And what if I lead these people to death? And what if closing the breach is impossible? Then we try anyway," and Cole said, "And because trying and failing is better than never trying at all, and because your people deserve a future, and because you are the bravest person I know." Lyra leaned against him. "And when did you become so wise?" "I learned from an elf who saved my life," and Cole said, and smiling, "and she taught me that every moment matters, and that brief and bright is still real." They sat in silence and hands intertwined and watching the moons cross the sky, and in the morning they would face the impossible and would risk everything. But tonight they had this, and this moment, and this connection, and this love that had grown, despite logic and despite fear. The journey to the breach took 5 days, and flying over mountains and across valleys and through territories marked on no maps, and the Shadow Realm touched the world at the broken peaks, and a place where reality was thin and dark. Creatures could slip through. They made camp at the base of the peaks, and Ember and Frost scouting ahead and reporting back. And the breach was large and growing, and shadow beasts gathered around it, and dozens of them, and feeding on the magic that leaked through. "This will be difficult," and Lyra said, and studying the scene, "and we must fight through and reach the breach and seal it before we are overwhelmed." Cole checked his weapons and human technology mixed with elf enchantments, and "We have fought worse, and we have faced impossible odds, and we do this together, and we do this for your people." The attack came at dawn, and the team moving in coordinated units, and Cole leading the fighters, and Lyra leading the mages, and Ember and Frost providing air support and diving and breathing fire and ice and scattering the shadow beasts. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, and shadow beasts were fast and deadly, and their claws dripping poison, and several elves fell and wounded, but not dead, and Cole fought with fierce precision and protecting Lyra, and clearing a path to the breach. Lyra reached the tear in reality, and a wound in the world itself, and pulsing with dark energy, and she began the sealing ritual and ancient words and complex magic, and pouring her power into closing the breach, and beside her 3 mages added their strength and weaving spells together. Cole and the fighters held the line, and keeping shadow beasts away, and buying time, and Ember incinerated a group trying to flank, and Frost froze another wave solid, but more kept coming, and endless and hungry. The breach began to close, and slowly, and inch by inch, but the backlash was immense, and dark energy exploding outward and knocking everyone down, and Lyra screamed, and the magic burning through her, and too much and too fast, and killing her. Cole saw her fall and ran, and ignoring the shadow beasts and ignoring everything except reaching Lyra, and he dropped beside her, and she was convulsing, and the dark magic tearing her apart from inside, and her eyes rolled back and blood trickling from her nose. "No," and Cole shouted, and pressing his hands to her chest, and trying to remember what she taught him. "And magic flows through all living things, and trust your instincts," and he reached deep, and finding the tiny spark of magic within himself, and human magic, and forgotten but not gone, and he poured it into Lyra, and pure and clean and untrained but real. The dark energy recoiled, and Cole's magic too foreign and too wild and too human, and it could not corrupt what it did not understand. And Lyra gasped, and her eyes opening, and together they finished the sealing, and their magic twining together, and elf and human, and closing the breach with a final burst of light. Silence fell, and the shadow beasts retreating, and the breach sealed, and the drain stopped, and magic flooding back into the world, and into the elves, and into the dragons, and into everything. Lyra sat up slowly, and Cole supporting her, and "We did it," and she whispered, "And we actually did it." Cole laughed, and exhausted and relieved, and never doubted it for a second. Lyra said, but smiled, and leaning against him. Around them, the team celebrated and wounded. but alive and victorious, and Ember and Frost landing and nuzzling their riders, and proud and protective. The journey home took longer, and everyone exhausted and healing, but the difference was already visible, and elves reported feeling stronger and more alive, and the magic responding better and flowing easier. When they reached the capital, the council was waiting, and news had traveled fast, and Lyra presented her report, and the breach was sealed, and the drain stopped, and the decline would reverse, and it had taken an elf and a human and 2 dragons and a team willing to risk everything. The council honored them all in ceremonies and recognition and promises of support for continued research, but Lyra and Cole slipped away, early and returning to their forest home and to peace and to each other. That night under the stars, Cole asked the question that had been building for months, and Lyra, "And will you bond with me, and not dragon bond, but life bond in human and elf, and whatever that means?" Lyra smiled, and tears in her eyes, and yes, and 1,000 times yes, and brief and bright is worth everything. The bonding ceremony was held in the Star Lake clearing, and witnessed by both elf and the memory of human and Ember, and Frost stood as guardians, and the council attended reluctantly at first, and then with genuine warmth, and recognizing that this union represented something new and something needed. Lyra wore traditional elf ceremonial robes, and silver and flowing, and adorned with crystals that caught the light, and Cole wore his best clothes and simple but clean, and at Lyra's request, he left his shoulder bare and the tattoo visible, and a reminder of how they began. The ceremony mixed traditions and elf magic, and human vows and promises spoken and sealed, and when they kissed, the forest itself seemed to glow, and magic responding to genuine love and to the impossible made real. Afterward there was celebration, and music and food and dancing, and even the stern council members smiled, and watching this strange couple and this healer who saved her people, and this human who refused to let her give up Cole's human magic, became a source of fascination, and researchers studying how a species that had abandoned magic could still carry its spark and still access its power when needed, and Cole worked with them, and patient and willing and hoping to help other humans rediscover what they had lost. Lyra continued her research, and now focusing on growth instead of decline, and the birth rate was already increasing, and slowly but measurably, and dragons were bonding with younger elves again, and the magic flowing stronger and cleaner, and the future opening up instead of closing down. They divided their time between the forest and the capital, and Cole learning diplomacy and Lyra teaching at the academy, but they always returned home, and to their shelter, and to Ember and Frost, and to the quiet peace of trees and streams. One afternoon, 2 years after the breach closing, a ship appeared in the sky, and human design and sleek and powerful, and Cole recognized it immediately, and a rescue vessel, and Earth had finally found him. The ship landed in a clearing, and soldiers emerged, and cautious and armed, and then they saw Cole in disbelief and joy, and Colonel Hayes, and he's alive. And after all this time, Cole approached slowly, and Lyra beside him, and Ember and Frost flanking them and protective, and the soldiers stared at the dragons and at the elf woman and at Cole, who looked different now and marked by magic and changed by love. Cole Harris and the colonel said, "And we thought you dead, and the crash and no survivors, and your family mourns you." "I lived," and Cole said simply, and gesturing to Lyra, "and she saved me and taught me and gave me a reason to stay." The colonel looked between them, and understanding dawning, "And you want to stay and here, and with them?" "Yes," and Cole said firmly, "And Earth is home. But this is home, too, and these are my people now, and Lyra's my wife, and Ember and Frost are my family, and I belong here." The colonel considered and then nodded, "And I will report you alive and living by choice, and your family deserves to know. And is there anything you need? And anything we can provide?" Cole thought, and then asked, "And can you bring books and human knowledge and science and history and art? And these people have magic, but they can benefit from human understanding too, and exchange and sharing, and growing together." The colonel agreed, and promising to return with supplies and knowledge, and offering Cole one last chance to come home. And Cole declined, and gentle but certain. "And this was home." Lyra watched the ship depart. "And are you sure? And you gave up everything?" "I gave up nothing," and Cole said, "and I gained everything. And Earth will always be part of me. But you are my future." Over the following years, the exchange between human and elf grew, and ships visiting and bringing knowledge, and taking back stories, and both species learning and adapting and growing, and Cole and Lyra became ambassadors and bridges between worlds. They had children eventually, and 2 daughters, and Kira and Luna, and both showing signs of magic, and both bonding with young dragons, and both carrying human determination and elf grace, and representing the future and the blending and the possibility. Cole taught his daughters about Earth and about human courage and innovation and persistence, and Lyra taught them about elf magic and history and connection to the land, and together they raised children who belonged to both worlds, and neither and. Something new entirely. Ember and Frost remained constant companions and growing old slowly, and dragons lived centuries, and they watched Kira and Luna grow, and watched Cole age, and accepted it with the wisdom of ancient creatures who understood that all life was temporary and all life was precious. One evening 20 years after the bonding, and Cole now in his 50s and showing gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, and he and Lyra sat watching the sunset and Kira and Luna playing. With young dragons in the clearing, I have been thinking, and Cole said, and about legacy and about what we leave behind. Lyra took his hand, and her own face unchanged, and elves aging so slowly, and what have you concluded? We changed the world, and Cole said, and quietly, and we saved your people, and we built bridges, and we raised daughters who will continue that work, and we loved fully and completely. And if I died tomorrow, I would have no regrets. You are not dying tomorrow. And Lyra said fiercely, and you have decades left. Cole smiled, and I know. But when the time comes, and when I am old and tired and ready, and you will be okay, and you will continue, and you will remember. I will remember everything, and Lyra promised, and tears in her eyes, and every moment, and every laugh, and every argument, and every touch, and I will carry you with me forever. Cole touched the tattoo on his shoulder and faded now and aged like him. And do you remember when I did this and when you thought I was crazy? I thought you were crazy, and Lyra admitted, and smiling through tears, and I did not understand, marking yourself with pain and with memory. But now I do. And now I see the value and the permanence and the choice to remember. They sat in comfortable silence and watching their daughters and watching the sky turn colors, and when the moons rose, Lyra created a memory crystal. And capturing this moment and this peace and this love, and to keep forever more years passed, and Cole aged, and his hair white and his body slower, but his mind sharp and his heart full, and he taught at the academy, and sharing human wisdom, and he wrote books and preserving knowledge, and he loved Lyra and his daughters, and his grandchildren, and his dragons, and his 78th birthday, and surrounded by family and by friends and by the people he had saved, and Cole was tired and ready and his body failing, but his spirit strong. Lyra held him in magic, easing his pain, and he looked at her with eyes still bright and still full of wonder, and thank you. And he whispered, and for saving me, and for loving me, and for giving me a life worth living. Thank you, and Lyra said, and tears falling, and for teaching me to fight, and for showing me that brief and bright is enough, and for being worth the pain. Cole smiled and touched her face and the tattoo, and he whispered, and remember, always. And Lyra promised. Cole closed his eyes, and Ember and Frost crooning softly, and Kira and Luna holding their mother, and he slipped away peacefully and surrounded by love, and having lived fully, and having changed the world. The funeral was attended by hundreds and elves and humans and even some dragons, and they celebrated his life and his courage and his impact, and Cole Harris, who fell from the sky and saved a dying race and built bridges between species, and loved an elf woman with his whole heart. Lyra stood strong and her daughters beside her, and she did not regret and did not wish for different. And Cole had been right, and brief and bright was enough, and 80 years of love was worth an eternity of grief. She touched her own shoulder, and where she had gotten her own tattoo years ago, and matching Cole's and his bite mark and her mark, and permanent and present, and a reminder that some people change everything, and some loves transcend species and time and logic. And in the nights that followed, when grief was heavy, and Lyra would look at the memory crystals and watch Cole laugh, and watch him fly with Ember, and watch him hold their daughters, and watch him look at her with that smile, and that warmth, and that absolute certainty. Ember and Frost remained with her, and aging now themselves, and loyal until the end, and they shared memories and spoke of the human who had been brave and foolish and wonderful. Kira and Luna grew and became leaders, and continuing their parents' work and building more bridges and strengthening ties, and their children carried both human and elf blood, and represented the future and the hope. One evening 50 years after Cole's death and Lyra still appearing young and barely aged, and stood at the Star Lake, and the place where he had asked her to bond, and she spoke to the reflection, "You were right," and she said softly, "And brief and bright was worth everything, and I would choose you again and 1,000 times again, and thank you for teaching me to live and to fight and to love without fear." The wind carried her words, and in somewhere, and somehow, and she believed he heard, and the tattoo on her shoulder, and permanent and present and never fading, and a reminder that Cole Harris had lived and had loved and had mattered, and that some marks and some people and were worth keeping forever.